about spending on infrastructure, the protectionist policies, the low interest rate active central bank. Isn't this the exact recipe for the Great Depression?
I'm afraid it is, and I don't think either candidate, or even Gary Johnson with a, open hand at changing policy, is going to be able to avoid the crisis that has been building.
Welcome to the Power and Market Report. I'm Albert Liu, joined once again by Dr. Mark Thornton. He's a senior fellow at the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama, as a frequent guest of the show. Dr. Thornton, thank you very much for joining me once again today. How are you?
Albert, I'm fine. It's great to be back on Power and Market.
It's great to have you back. Last time I think it was Brexit. So first Brexit, now this. What are your thoughts on the outcome of the election? First of all, was it a surprise to you?
Well, it was a surprise, I think, to everybody. The last few days of the campaign, we saw the polls improving for Mr. Trump. And then, of course, a couple days really without any substantial polls. So he was looking better going into the election, but it was still pretty much a surprise for me as well.
Yeah, and I think, politics aside, I think the big takeaway for me was the role that new media played in the outcome. I think if you take away Twitter and you take away YouTube, I just don't know if he can pull it off. Certainly if you take away Drudge Report and some of these alt media sites, he doesn't have a chance because the mainstream was pretty much in the tank for Hillary, as they say.
Oh, absolutely. It was so perfectly crystal clear that the mainstream media was supporting Hillary, humiliating Trump at every turn. Trump did an end around using new media, social media. Obviously, his Twitter campaign had a big effect because he could hit back instantaneously all around the world. And of course, the mainstream media was basically forced to report on all of that. And so it's a victory for the anti-establishment people. It's a victory for new media. We have no idea exactly how things are going to work out during the Trump administration. He has some positive and some negative policies. But the thing that I think we can take to heart here is that the establishment lost big time. We sent the Clintons packing, and the anti-establishment has stepped forth to represent the real people of America in their government.
Yeah, and I have to agree with that. And let's talk about some of these policies. But before we get to that, I'll just add that I think that Trump ended up being much smarter than all of us gave him credit for. I mean, I think he went through 3 campaign managers. He seemed to be running the show unconventionally by himself, driving the agenda. And he seems to be a very kind of a pragmatic person. He doesn't hold grudges from what I can tell. Now, the bad news is he seems to be pretty comfortable swimming in this swamp that he said that he was going to drain. We had Mitt Romney visit him recently, and he's close with Rudy Giuliani. He seems to be very comfortable in that swamp. So I don't know if we're going to get the change, unfortunately, that we're hoping for. And I read something funny in one of the mainstream papers. They were criticizing Trump for backing away from some of his promises, not because he was backing away from them, which the newspaper conceded that, well, they all do that, but they're making a point over how quickly he was moving away from some of his campaign promises.
Well, yes, he is smart and he is quick. He has the stamina that it's truly unbelievable the way he could do those events, multiple events, day after day after day. If I have to go someplace in an airplane and give a 30-minute talk, it's an exhausting experience for me. And yet, Mr. Trump did it, multiple speeches every day, on the road for weeks at a time. Truly amazing what he's able to do and what he was able to pull off. And I agree, he's got a personality disorder. He's hanging out with unsavory characters. But, if you're going full tilt against the establishment, that's pretty much all you have left.
Okay, so let's get into some of these policies. He had so many positions that he mentioned because he was always talking, it seemed. and sometimes he would contradict himself. So we really have no idea which of these are going to be implemented. But let's just play the what-if game, talk about some of these policies. For instance, the one that people usually avoid is the reform of benefits, Social Security and Medicare. And I think he had avoided talking about that in the sense that he didn't want to reform them. He said he wanted to keep the commitments. Now he seems to be on board with Republicans saying that they have to reform it into a I guess a form that will work, something more modern. I forget what the phrase was, but do you think that he's going to be forced to do this, or is he saying this just to get along with the mainstream?
Well, I think he's forced into saying something about this issue in a positive light. I don't think he's really considered it very much. He didn't want to put the reform part in there during the campaign because he'd lose a massive number of voters who are dependent upon Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare. And so I don't expect a big reform, but I do think he'll try to do something, and he might try to do something very quickly. The best advice I can give Mr. Trump is to get all of the bad news on the table as quickly as possible. And so your reforms of the tax code and Social Security and so on and so forth, get them on the table as soon as possible, get the bad news out of the way so that the economy can recover for him 4 years from now.
Okay. There were a lot of other things that I think were meant simply to, appease the dissatisfied, talking about repealing Obamacare, getting rid of the EPA, getting rid of Common Core, barring refugees from entering, surveillance of mosques, bombing ISIS, shutting down parts of the internet, and bringing back torture. These are all things that are meant to push people's buttons, I think. But on the economic front, immigration was a pretty serious issue. And he's talking about building a wall still, although he scaled that back a little bit, and getting Mexico to pay for it through tariffs and fees. Now, if he goes ahead and does this, what do you think the effect on the economy will be?
Well, I think that in terms of Common Core, I think he is going to dump that. I think he is going to scale back the EPA significantly. In dumping Common Core is going to improve education over the long haul. Scaling back the EPA's authority is going to be very beneficial for our energy industry, specifically oil, natural gas, and coal. Obama basically bankrupted all of our coal companies. And if we can bring those back, that's more jobs, that's lower energy costs, that's more production in the U.S. economy and exports. And so I see that as a very beneficial area of Mr. Trump's agenda. And I think he'll come through on that. I don't think he's going to get rid of the EPA, but I think he's going to scale back their authority and also reduce the regulatory burden on those industries. So that's, I think, a good positive part of his agenda. Okay,
what about the repeal and replace Obamacare? Are we going to get something that's better at all? I'm starting to lose confidence in this.
Well, Obamacare is crashing and burning as we speak. Insurance rates are going up as we expected, but as the Obama administration, the Democrats said, no, that won't happen. Insurance rates are actually going to go down. Well, we were right and they were wrong, and something's going to have to be done. Health insurance costs, health insurance regulations, and health insurance rates are all getting out of control. So he's going to have to do something. He's mentioned a single payer system, which would be against the Republican agenda. It would probably hurt the pharmaceutical companies and all the other monopolies that inhibit the healthcare space. So we really don't know what he's going to do, but he's going to have to do something in his first term, and hopefully very quickly.
He said he's going to continue to allow young adults to stay on the parents' plan, but the big one was the pre-existing conditions. Isn't that a big one as far as tying his hands on how much he can reduce costs?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very tricky thing. Pre-existing conditions, is something that insurance companies, it's just like having DUIs on your driving record. Insurance companies are going to have to demand much higher rates to cover those people. Keeping kids on your plan to 26 or 29 even is not a big deal because people in their 20s tend not to use much health care at all. And so they're a very small burden. They were expected to be the ones that brought in all the additional revenue to make Obamacare float. And so I don't think that's a big sticking point, but the pre-existing conditions, we have to deal with that in an economic sense and not a political or ethical based solution, because you just simply can't afford to toss that burden onto everybody else.
Yeah, I remember way back during the Republican primary, him saying something about allowing insurance companies to compete across state borders, and I haven't heard anything about that since. Do you think that's going to be part of the plan?
It should be. It certainly should be. That's a major detriment in our healthcare system altogether. And so that's something I think that definitely should be part of the reform. However, the insurance companies themselves are a huge interest group, and they have effective lobbying groups, lots of resources at their disposal to try to fight that thing. Any kind of reform. I mean, they basically wrote Obamacare. The providers and the insurance companies put that stinker together. Obama didn't actually do it. And so that's a very important part of the reform, is to get competition going across state lines. And basically right now, state insurance regulators do the regulating, and that's why we don't have interstate competition in health insurance. And actually, there's much better ways of reforming healthcare, like, for example, using the tax code to give tax credits for catastrophic insurance, healthcare insurance, using tax deductions to allow people to build healthcare savings accounts that they get to keep, so that they're making decisions about what to spend on and how much to spend. It's their money. They're going to want to know the prices. And so then you put competition into healthcare itself. And so that's the angle in the current situation that I would move towards, is tax credits and tax deductions to make people more knowledgeable about how much resources they're using. And they don't know that the insurance company is paying $5,000 for medicine, or $10,000 for a simple procedure, or $1,500 for a test. And if we put the prices back into the system, if we make the consumers spend their own money rather than just tossing it off to the insurance companies, I think that healthcare costs will decline dramatically and will become much better. Right now, my opinion is that Americans use too much healthcare. They're over-medicated and subject to abuse by the medical system.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Let's move on to some other aspects of the plan. Stop spending on space programs, he says. Bad for SpaceX and Elon Musk, I guess. So that must be seen as a positive. Do you agree?
Oh yes, I agree. History tells us that the private sector is much better at exploring. It can be nonprofit as well. It doesn't have to be for-profit. But most of the non-European world was discovered by private explorers. And sometimes they were actually chasing prize money put up by wealthy individuals, like we see today in the space. And so I think that's definitely the way to go. There's no reason to have this bloated bureaucracy that's very ineffective and wastes way too many resources. So I'm totally on board with that.
He also wants to increase spending on the military which is going to be good for certain contractors, but probably not so good for everyone else.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we need to cut the military, especially right now, with the large deficits that we're running and the even larger deficits that are expected. And so we need a big reduction in military spending in the U.S., and it needs to be much more efficient. We haven't even had a real defense budget in over a decade, and we haven't had an effective audit of the Defense Department in over a decade. They don't know where the money has been spent. So until they know what they're spending money on, I would take away the checkbook altogether.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Let's finish off with the topic of jobs. He consistently, I think, throughout his campaign talked about bringing back jobs from China, bringing back jobs from Mexico. He talked about how the U.S. has been taken advantage of. He was talking specifically about Apple, I think, Nabisco, Ford he singled out, and I think Amazon as well. Today I read that Ford had scrapped one of its plans to move a factory to Mexico. And you know, us free traders out here, we like to see those jobs go wherever they're most effectively placed. But at the same time, if this decision holds, it's going to save a lot of jobs in the U.S. So where do you come down on this?
Well, I'm not sure about the Ford situation, whether or not they did what they did because of Trump or for other reasons. You know, I live in an area where there's brand new automobile plants, so there's no reason why we can't have automobile productions and free trade. And so the good part about Trump's platform is he's against trade deals. And I'm against trade deals as well, such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the European one. And I think if we can get away from that and move towards a unilateral free trade policy, but accompanying it has got to be a proper monetary policy and a proper tax policy. If we have a proper tax policy, a proper corporate tax policy, and a proper monetary policy, we're not going to see those jobs in the absence of these trade deals. We're not going to see a lot of jobs flooding out of the United States. They're going to be flooding into the United States to take advantage of a good tax policy, a good corporate tax policy, and a good monetary policy. And basically, we've had reckless spending, a tragic monetary policy for 15 years. We've seen the real median income of American families go consistently down. And so you don't have to fix trade so much as you have to fix policy in general. And then free trade is just fine. It works for everyone. You know, Apple uses manufacturing in China, but that's all they do in China. They put the iPhones together and the iPads together. Very low wage work. It's not value creating work. What's creating value is the people who design Apple products, the people who style Apple products on the front end, and then the people who sell Apple products, the people who market Apple products, and the people who sell apps. Those are all high wage jobs, and they're all still in the U.S., including a lot of the makers of the parts that go into Apple products. Most of them are in the U.S., but there's some part producers in South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. But it's a worldwide effort. Without that worldwide effort, we wouldn't have the effective, low-cost iPhones that we do nowadays, and which dominate the market because they're a superior product that, without world trade, would not really be economically feasible.
Yeah, and I guess I agree with you in that these trade deals are horrible, and we should just have free trade. It doesn't sound like that's what President Trump would be trying to achieve, though. He talks about, for instance, winning these trade deals, so getting better terms. He talks about tariffs on imports, and that's, I think, what he threatened Ford with, was that if you want to manufacture these cars in Mexico, you're going to have a 30-something% tax on the finished goods coming back. And even if he fixes the tax policy, I don't think he's with us on the monetary policy. Sure, he's criticized Janet Yellen, but he's been sort of careful about criticizing the Fed And it sounds like he's a low interest rate guy, as he once said. So we're still going to have a disastrous monetary policy, are we not?
I'm afraid so. And of course, I don't like all those protectionism sentiments that he has expressed. They're very dangerous. In 1930, we passed the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill, put a tremendous tax on imports, and that contributed mightily to the Great Depression. And I think we're going to have an economic crisis or depression shortly, but we certainly don't want it to be great. We don't want a 10-year depression. We don't want 25% unemployment. We don't want what is happening in Japan with 25 years of economic malaise under the continuous spending deficits, zero interest rates. They need to fix that. We need to fix that. And we don't want to adopt Trump's protectionist agenda. That's very dangerous, and it could be lethal.
It would be. And you know, it's interesting you bring up Smoot-Hawley, because if something does happen in the next year or two, and the probability is fairly high, I think that it will, none of it should be blamed on Trump, even though it will be. But if he puts into force all of these ideas that he has about spending on infrastructure, the protectionist policies, the low interest rate active central bank, isn't this the exact recipe for the Great Depression?
I'm afraid it is. And I don't think either candidate, or even Gary Johnson with a, open hand at changing policy, is going to be able to avoid the crisis that has been building under 7 or 8 years of insane monetary policy at the Federal Reserve, led by mostly academic economists, and Mario Draghi, who's also an MIT economist. And they apparently have no idea of exactly how the real world works. They've got one tool, it's printing money, it hasn't worked, and it's going to cause another economic crisis in the fairly short run.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so it's kind of a negative point to leave it on, but I know you got to run. Dr. Thornton, I want to ask you about what's going on in the Mises Institute. You have a lot of interesting, fun events coming up. Can you tell us about what's going on in December and then, in 2017?
Well, of course, in 2017, we're going to have all of our regular programs, the Rothbard Graduate Seminar, the Mises University, the Austrian Economics Research Conference in the spring. December 1st, we have an event in Orlando. It's with Tom Woods. And it's going to be sort of a recapping of what went on during the election and what Tom thinks is going forward. You have to be pre-registered for that event in Orlando on December 1st. And then in the spring, we're going to be out in California with a big Mises Circle. It's going to be a great event at a great time. And I encourage everybody to go to Mises.org, check out those events and everything else we have to offer. That's mises.org, and get signed up to get educated and get updated about what's going on in the world of Austrian economics.
All right, thank you very much. We'll leave it at that. I really want to thank you for coming on the show once again. It's always great to catch up. Dr. Thornton, thank you.
Thank you, Albert.
And don't forget to visit powerandmarket.com for insightful interviews with the world's leading experts in economics, finance, and investing. Hi, I'm Albert Liu, host of the Power and Market Report. If you enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe to my channel by clicking the button on the top left of the screen. And don't forget, you can also visit us on Facebook and at powerandmarket.com. Thanks again for watching.